Good evening. My name is Kwabena Yeboah, popularly known as KB. This evening we're going to talk about cerebellum, which is part of the brain. This is the brainstem, and this is the little brain here. So in effect, we will say it stands for the little brain, and it's a structure of central nervous system, and its important role is motor control, with cerebral dysfunction often presenting with motor signs. In particular, it is active in coordination, precision, and timing of movement, as well as motor learning. This is part of the brain, and this brainstem and this little brain go in continuation of the main brain. During the embryonic development, the anterior portion of the neural tube forms three parts that give rise to the brain in association with three structures. Those structures are the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. In other words, we can call the forebrain the proencephalon, the midbrain mesencephalon, and the hindbrain rhoencephalon. The hindbrain is subsequently divided into mesencephalon, which is the superior part, and the myelencephalon, which is the inferior part, and the cerebellum developed from the mesencephalon division. Let's talk about the location of the cerebellum. The cerebellum is located at the back of the brain, immediately inferior to the occipital and temporal lobe, and within the posterior cranial fusion. It is separated from these lobes by tentorium cerebelli, a tough layer of dura mater. So this is the brainstem, and this is cerebellum. The pons is going to be here, so posterior to the pons is cerebellum, and superior is cerebrum. There are three main functional divisions of cerebellum. The first one is spinocerebellum. The second one is cerebrocerebellum. And the third one is vestibular cerebellum. As you can see here on the diagram, it is very clear. But when you talk about it, the cerebrocerebellum is the largest among all the functional divisions. So let's talk about the cerebrocerebellum. The cerebrocerebellum is formed by lateral hemisphere, and it is involved in planning, movement, and motor learning. It receives its inputs from the central cortex and portine nuclei, and it sends output to the thalamus and the nucleus. So that is all we can say about the cerebellum. Let's talk about spinal cerebellum. The spinal cerebellum comprises of vermis and intermediate zone of the cerebellar hemisphere. It involves in regulating body movement by allowing the error correction. It receives proprioception information. That is all we can also say about spinal cerebellum. The last divisional function we're going to talk about is vestibular cerebellum. Vestibular cerebellum is a functional equivalent to the frontocondylar lobe. It involves in controlling balance and ocular reflexes, mainly fixation on a target. It receives its inputs from the vestibular system, and it sends its output back to the vestibular nuclei. That is all we can talk about the functional division. Now let's talk about the structural divisions of cerebellum. As we can see from this diagram here, we have two main fuses or lines that is running mediolaterally and is dividing this whole structure into three different lobes. We have this right here, this line, which is primary fusure. And then when you come to the back right here, there is posterolateral fusure. Those two fuses divide the whole structure into three lobes. We have anterior lobe, which is indicated by the red color. And then we have the posterior lobe, which is indicated by the blue color. And then flocculonodular lobe, which is indicated by the black tip right here. These are the main types of lobes the primary and posterolateral fusure divides. And as you can see, this one, that is the brain stem. This time, let's talk about the cerebellar nuclei. There are so many different types of cerebellar nuclei. One of them is fastigial nucleus. Fastigial nucleus is the most media out of all the nuclei. And then we can move on and talk about dentate nucleus. Dentate nucleus is the biggest one or largest one, and it is the most lateral. Then we can talk about the two different nuclei, which is emboliform nucleus and then globulus nucleus. Those are intermediate. So those combined are called interpost nuclei. There is another one that we want to talk about, which is vestibular nuclei. Vestibular nuclei, as you can see, is not found here. The reason is that it is located outside the cerebellum and in the medulla. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anurag. Today my topic is cerebellum. The input and output of cerebellum is carried out by three fibers called as cerebellar peduncles. We have three cerebellar peduncles: superior cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle. The superior cerebellar peduncle is also called as brachium conjunctivum. And it is the primarily superior cerebellar peduncle is carried out by afferent fibers from the cerebellar nuclei. And it is also has afferent fibers from the spinocerebellar tract. Coming to the next, middle cerebellar peduncle. Middle cerebellar peduncle is also called as brachium pontis. The brachium pontis, afferent fibers are coming out from the brachium pontis or pontis nuclei. Coming to the next, inferior cerebellar peduncle. Inferior cerebellar peduncle is also called as rest form body. The afferent fibers are primarily coming out from the medulla, as well as the afferent fibers from vestibular nuclei. Next topic is connectivity. The cerebellar cortex has very simple connectivity throughout the whole structure, which is called as stereotype connectivity. Mossy fibers. Mossy fibers originate from the pontis nuclei, brainstem of reticular formation, and vestibular nuclei and spinal cord. They make excitatory projections onto the granule cells and cerebellar nuclei into the cerebellar cortex. The axons of the granule cells send upwards toward the cortex surface, and each axon bifurcates into the molecular surface in opposite direction, which is also called as parallel fibers. These are called parallel fibers because they run throughout the axis of the cortex folds. and mixed with the Purkinje fibers. Coming to the next, climbing fibers. These are the climbing fibers. As you can see, these are all climbing all the way to the dendrites of the Purkinje axons, Purkinje cells. They are called climbing fibers because you can see the structure. They are climbing and wrapping around the dendrites of the Purkinje cells. These are called Purkinje axons. Now they are exclusively connectivity from the olive cells or inferior olive. Next, functions of cerebellum. There are 4 distinctive functions. As you can see, maintenance and of balance and posture, coordination of voluntary movements, and motor learning. Coming to the last and least one, cognitive functions. Let's talk about the balance of posture and movements, balancing the body. Cerebellum is important for the balancing of our body by adjusting positions. Although it's originating from the proprioceptors and vestibular receptors. As you can see, now I am walking. My cerebellum is adjusting my position with adjusting my position of the lower limb. Coming to the next topic, coordination of voluntary movements. Coordination of voluntary movements means all the muscles which are functioning, working together, group of muscles working together to make that movement. As I am walking now, you can see my gestures. My muscles are working coordinatedly together, collectively. My lower limb is also working together collectively for temporarily. Coming to the next, motor learning. Motor learning, it is also important in motor learning. By learning and it is important for loading upon the muscles or loading, it maintains the loading and unloading upon the muscles. The last but least, cognitive functions. Although we know cerebellum is important for motor functions, collectively for motor functions or motor learning itself, but it also is important for language, cognitive functions such as language. As you can see, I am explaining topic in English language. Thank you.